A new stealthy piece of malware is infecting thousands of devices.
Stan, it looks like you've got a story about some new malware for us.
Yes, this is a story about a new malware strain called Nodersock or Divergent. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. I don't know who to apologize to because there's no standard body for naming malware. But somebody pointed me at this ThreatPost blog about this malware. And actually, two separate research groups were investigating it, Microsoft and Cisco Talos. They both dived into this malware family. It seems like it's been around since maybe March or so. I was actually looking at this malware strain as well, and I found both of the analyses quite accurate, quite good reads, but also a little bit different. And I'll talk about the differences in their analysis as well. So first of all, what is this malware? It's malware like any other, but the unique thing about it is it's considered like fileless. And what does that mean? What do you mean fileless malware? Isn't malware always in a file that you can double click? And so actually, when it starts out, I think yes, most malware samples are inside of a file. This one in particular comes, they think, as an HTA file, which is a type of file that I guess you can cause execution from. So when the malware starts up, or when it's kind of like sets itself up, it actually uses the registry to live. So it doesn't live like on the file system per se. It's actually always stored somehow inside of the registry. And then there's something else that loads it from the registry each time. So when it bootstraps, like every restart, there's another process, which actually I'm not 100% sure what that process is, that takes the malware out and starts executing it. But it uses a lot of PowerShell, which is a scripting language in Windows. A lot of legitimate apps use it, and a lot of malware uses it as well. And the other thing with this PowerShell is that there's a lot of obfuscation and randomization. So if you ever see like weird PowerShell processes, let's say you're looking at a system, you see like weird PowerShell processes, and it's got like base64 in there, which is like a bunch of characters, and you're like, what is this doing?
Kind of a red flag.
It's a red flag, actually, yes. I think that's how both of these groups got smart to this malware. So this malware also tries to disable Windows Defender. It actually reminded me of the last time you and I were on ThreatTrack, and you were talking about GoodKit malware.
Yeah.
Yes, I actually had to go back to that episode and reread the article to see if the techniques in this malware were similar to the techniques in that malware. And some of them are, but it was actually not the same. I thought it might be like a similar malware strain. Okay, so what's unique about this malware? So when I looked at it, and based on both of the blogs here, it looks like it's some sort of like a Trojan that has components or modules.
Okay.
Its primary function seems to be to kind of stay hidden and undetected. So living in the registry, loading itself up, connecting to some IP addresses to get additional configuration sections. But that's kind of like its primary function. And then what it does is when it connects to those IP addresses, it actually tells it like which modules to download. And some of the modules that it has, which is kind of interesting, is Node.js, which is the legitimate Node.js application. So it uses that as part of some of its functionality. It's got an AV blocking module. And so I was curious to know how that worked. And both of the blog entries by Microsoft and Cisco provided the answer, which is it blocks communication to, because like every AV has like an update process.
Yeah.
And so it figures out how to block the communication for AV processes to prevent them from connecting on port 80 or 443.
Oh, wow.
And so maybe that'll stop like updates from happening depending on the, how that antivirus works.
It's modularized. So when it sits on your system and your registry, when it communicates to a C2 or a command and control server, it can actually decide what needs to come down as far as new functionality goes for malware. So not all malware utilizes that technique. It's pretty sophisticated. It's complicated, as you can imagine, to include something like modularization in malware, but this one actually does.
It has lots of different C2s programmed into it, which I believe are most likely compromised. and I think that was echoed in one of the analyses as well. And why? Why are you going to have like dozens or scores of different C2 servers? It's really to prevent takedown. And in fact, it's true that it's helped the adversaries, because even as of today, we could see that some of the infrastructure is down, but some of the infrastructure is still up. And unfortunately, there are still victims who are connecting to some of the C2. It's kind of slowly, revealing itself as each one gets taken down, like another one takes its place. But the one unique thing that I did not know before that I've learned from reading both of these articles is the WinDivert library that's used by the malware. And this WinDivert is actually, I guess, a library that lets you play with the parameters of network packets before you send them out on the wire. So if you wanted to modify the TCP flags or something in the IP header, generally the operating system doesn't expose that to you.
Yeah.
But it looks like by using this library, you might be able to manipulate that. I think this is also somehow used with that AV blocking functionality.
It's clever.
It's very clever, and it's a tool that's very available out there, and it's I guess an open source project or something like that. Now, what's different between like the Cisco analysis and the Microsoft analysis, which I thought was interesting. So Microsoft, right, they've got Windows Defender, they're an operating system vendor. They were like, when I was reading their analysis, it seemed to be like more focused on detection mechanisms and figuring out like how to stop this malware, how to detect it's running, things like that. When I was reading the Cisco analysis, while they both covered similar topics, I felt like they're concentrated more heavily like on the networking aspects of how the malware operates.
So
In
maybe
fact,
maybe one's consumer driven. How do we get our people who own our AV products? How do we get them protected? Whereas on the other side of the house, let's understand what this malware is doing.
I think they both did that, but one like really focused, I thought, on the networking like Cisco, and you're right, and the other one more on, yes, how to bolster these, like Windows Defender, for example, from Microsoft, and how to make that better. In fact, I think the researcher who posted for Microsoft was on the Windows Defender team. And actually, one thing I noticed, I was like, this thing, when I was reversing this malware, I was like, wow, this thing really wants to take care of Windows Defender. Like, it really does not like Windows Defender. It's trying to turn it off any which way it can. So the one interesting thing about WinDivert is that Cisco covered that the reason they believe this is being used, and I didn't know this before either, is that, let's say when you're visiting advertising websites, they can actually tell what kind of device you are, like an Android or an iOS, based on even the TCP headers that you're sending. So most devices, they can't control that. So you can actually fingerprint devices based on the type of TCP packets or something in there. And I guess advertisers are doing this now. So like if you're visiting an advertisement and it's supposed to be a mobile ad and they're expecting people who have Android, and you come in looking like you're a Windows machine, they actually won't pay for the click, so to speak. They won't count that as a legitimate click because it looks fraudulent. I didn't realize, I should have realized that that's how advanced it's getting. But these adversaries, they're clued into that. And what they're doing is they were trying to use this WinDivert library to change the flags to emulate an Android device. So actually they had modules, according to the Cisco write-up, that would send like Android-like traffic towards Android-like clicks and iOS-type traffic towards iOS-type clicks. And that was part of their strategy for monetizing this.
But because of the sophistication of this malware, do we know if there's a particular target base? Is it being sprayed out everywhere? How is it being delivered, and who is it being delivered to?
I think both articles reference that thousands of PCs are being impacted, and I think it means that this is probably something that's targeting lots of different people just by, I would say, most likely some kind of phishing or drive-by downloads. I think it was maybe the Microsoft article that made reference to this initially, is they thought it was based on drive-by downloads from advertising. So when people would visit websites and they would see advertisements, those might be like somehow malicious or hacked, and it will cause this HTA file to be downloaded and then ultimately install the malware. That's a very likely scenario. That just, again, if that is the case, it shows the sophistication of this group, because those tactics are also not so easy to implement. So somebody who obviously is wanting to stay hidden and undetected for long periods of time.
Yeah, it sounds like currently it's targeted at click fraud. But yeah, this was a fascinating piece of malware. I'm glad you had some time to play with it. I'd like to have it.
First and foremost, I would say kind of, as always, stay away from shady websites on the internet. If you perform a Google search and you see a result that just looks a little bit weird, or it's from a domain that you've never heard of, maybe stick with what you know in that regard.